mentoring really is the gift that keeps on, giving and changing our lives today and for the future.
Really happy to be welcoming Suzette Julien, who's been the elementary principal for the past 25 years at the International School of the Port of Spain in Trinidad and Tobago. Suzette's got started in her work in Trinidad, actually helping with local private schools, and they found out she was there, and then that was it. The secret was out, and she has been serving as the elementary principal as alongside working in local programs. Myself had the chance to be there a couple of times and saw the great work that the school was doing alongside the local community. And Suzette has been right there. Also, she gave me lists of all the different initiatives and things that she's done at her school. And so I said, there's a really long list, and just about any topic that you could think of, she has had a leadership role in leading those processes. We're also really grateful to you, Suzette, for taking on in your doctoral work this question: how women of color leaders make sense of their professional and personal experiences in K-12 international schools. So that's just really interesting work that we just have very little on, and we're looking forward to hopefully getting a chance to hear a little bit about that, if not directly through your Pearl, through some of our questioning. And Suzette's been a long-time contributor to us at the PTC, serving as coordinator way back when we first got the TTC program started for teachers. She was right there with us and helped us to make it feel professional and keep it running and contribute. And then her school changed its timetable, and she wasn't able to do it for a while. You'll all recognize that. But now she's back with us. So I'm really, thank you so much, Suzette, for being with us today. And we're ready for your wisdom.
Okay. Well, thank you to the community, international community. Greetings from Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, Bambi. Bambi has been one of those mentors for me for a number of years. I started off in that whole idea of the PTC and gaining the confidence and being able to do so. So again, welcome and thank you. And so I'm going to share my screen now, Bambi, as we move right into my pro. And so I want to just say that, hold on a second. Let's see, is everyone seeing that? Can you see that? Okay, good. So this is basically, I can remember what it was like just starting out and being able to just germinate from that seed and shoot a plant out and begin my whole leadership career. And so that encompassed me being a woman leader, going off to different places in the US and internationally to basically learn about those skills in leadership. And so I had district leaders and superintendents, even in the US, that just took me under their wing. And so pretty much that's the way I've started, along with me attending the PTC and gaining a lot of those skills to begin to grow. And so my growth has been tremendous. It's a journey, and it continues to be a journey. So mentoring, I mean, many of you have had mentoring, whether you started, from your own teaching careers or whether you entered the leadership within your schools. And so basically, mentoring is really the art of what I consider the art of building relationships. And so supporting that learning relationship, really getting to know each other and honing and understanding what does this really mean in an individual sharing and giving forth what that wisdom is, because I see it as wisdom as well. Sharing knowledge, experiences with others who are ready, to embrace, because in order to be mentored, you have to be ready to embrace and be open-minded about this whole idea of learning from someone else, and also to enrich a professional journey. And so when we think about that whole mentoring, we also have to understand it's an interdependence. It's an interdependence when you think about the mentee and the mentor. And so For the mentee, it's about imagining, it's been igniting, it's about that whole idea of, and you've heard lots of the talk about this week about empathy and what that truly means, gaining that confidence on both sides of the mentee and mentor. And for the mentee, it's about really transforming and taking that, the knowledge and skills that you've gained, and being able to transform your behaviors, really. And when you look at the mentor side of things, it's about holding on to that trust and really feeling a sense of, I can work with this individual. I know as a leader, I need to be able to allow a sense of, that honesty and that integrity. And I could really, there's never any foolish, question. And so allowing that to happen, and the peer-to-peer, as the mentee. And then of course the empowerment, which I think is huge. And again, the art of mentoring, it's all about building that relationship. And so what does it look like and what could it be? It could be traditional, where you have one mentor and it's matched with someone else. It could be distance mentoring, which I've been involved with, whereby I was leading a group where I'm able to have those discussions. It could be group mentoring, where you have a single mentor or that's involved with a cohort of mentees, or you can have a group of mentees that involve with vice versa. And so this idea of reverse mentoring, that whole cross generation mentoring, that was really critical for us when we propelled into this virtual world. Our junior teachers and our senior teachers were just grappling with situations, but yet they were able, over this 12-week of understanding, what does this online mean and how do we create these classes and so forth. So there was a sense of really a reverse mentoring occurring there. And that was really powerful for both, what you consider your expertise and your juniors in the field. And so one of the things you think about is that the more you understand people, the greater your chances of successfully mentoring others. And I come back to the fact of the idea of cultivating empathy. And so that is crucial. And again, you've heard so much about that, the emotional side, the cognitive side, and the compassionate. And I can't reiterate enough how important that empathy is. Putting yourself in a different position, how open-minded are you to understand and to really, truly, deeply understand that individual? And so when we think about mentoring, we're thinking about what's that vision, what's that training, what's that coaching involve in terms of that mentorship? What is that support? What does that look like? In other words, what are some of the strengths? And what is that connection that we're feeling? That as we go through this whole process of mentoring as leaders, what kinds of advice we can give. And of course, we want to be successful. And so when we think about effective mentorship, we're thinking about, really those high expectations for self-development in high quality profession growth and opportunities. We're thinking about the knowledge of the utilization, mentoring and coaching best practices, and perhaps, how are you communicating? Are you listening? I think it was Tanny who said earlier, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. How are you now applying that and really truly listening and being an active listener in this whole process? What is that clear vision that you've got? And really thinking about theory and practice, and what does that, how does the practice influence the theory? How does the theory influence the practices that you're seeing? It's almost symbiotic dance that I see that the theory and practice that they do together. And so as an active instructional leadership, you're really being involved of, what kinds of feedback, what kinds of probing, what kinds of questions are you allowing to occur in this whole idea of development of learning and understanding? What are the strategies? What kinds of questions and scenarios are you posing in the contextual? And again, how are you contributing to that body of knowledge? What kind of data have you collected to be able to look at a situation and to determine, what practices I can add to that. And critical to this is it's the whole reflection. What are you thinking about? How are you making changes based on what you're seeing in practice? And of course, there's always respect and, respecting each other and confidentiality and the ethics behind it. And that's, I believe, where that whole idea of the empathy and the trust and really allowing the person to be able to ask those questions, and not feel it's a silly question, or I'm afraid to ask that. So building that, and that sometimes takes a little while in practice. And then, of course, fostering the culture that promotes, whether it's formal or informal mentoring relationships, and how are you building that to be sustained within the culture? How are you changing the mind shift that we can all learn, and that we, as leaders, we are all mentors, and really creating, whether it's a training, whether it's, going off to the PTC, how can we begin to understand that whole idea of the learning process? And of course, when we think of the organization, we want to really think about what's the vision, what's the mission, what are the resources we have available, what is the value, what is your strategic plan stating, how can it be sustainable if you do decide to create mentoring programs. And of course, you want to think about the mentors and the, mentor cadre. Who are the people? Strength finders is one that I use early in the year to think about, what are the talents we have on board, because we get new teachers and they too can be mentors. What does that look like? How do you build that team, and how flexible are they and committed to that? And so even in learning about the mentor cadre that you have, you want to make sure that also there's that good match. Your staff, and basically trying to determine what's the fit, what's the learning need that you may have the skills and talents for, that you want to be able to allow that trust and that relationship building. And then of course it's the mentoring training, where basically you're looking at, who's getting trained, is it your HODs in terms of leadership? Is it your students who require mentoring? Is it your new superintendent, from a school who's coming to a new school? They too need mentoring because they're transitioning from one job to the next. And, understanding that culture, it's huge in that transition phase. And when you think about designing the mentoring assignments, you might want to look at really, what is that design cycle? What are the needs? And you want to go through the process of that whole idea of the design cycle, the ideation, the collaboration, the prototype. And of course, you want to make sure that you're testing it. And you want to have that iterative process that you're going back and forth and you can start in different places, but knowing that there's a design process that is involved. And of course, you want to look at the evaluation, what is the organization? Did we fulfill those, the value? Did we value it? Did we match people appropriately? The kinds of training and ensuring that we have the funding for that. Or can we then go to, NAESB or principals training, or those other organizations can allow you. So those are the things, because at the end of the day, if you are really committed to mentorship, you'd want to ensure there's sustainability. You want to really grow your own, the GYO, grow your leaders. And so ensuring that you're expanding that whole leadership role as you look at these programs. And so to be successful, and I think it's Pip who talked about this, this is one that I tend to use when looking at, how do I want to chart my course in terms of success? And so, of course, what is that urgency that you're looking at? And who are those guiding teams? The cadre of mentors that we just spoke about. Can we get this vision right? Can we get the mission right? And how do we get buy-in and understand the flexibility of this whole idea of mentoring and empowerment? I mean, I'm going to speak a little bit more about that, but empowering our leaders and our growing our own leaders within our institution. And what are the short-term wins? And don't let up. How we are transforming, and we may have some difficulty transforming, but we keep at it. And of course, in order to make that whole mentorship change and shift, we want to ensure that we truly stick to it. And so these steps I've used, throughout the years, and it's helped me in terms of, the whole idea of success. And so now we talk about a little bit more of that mentorship and the training and the coaching and the development and the competence and what does that look like. And, there isn't, I think, one model that I can say, okay, go and get this model for it. It's about you in your whole vision and what you see you want for your school. And so understanding where you want to begin and where you want to end up. And so some tips about mentoring, before you start, I think I spoke a little bit about, the different types of mentorship. Understanding it's about sharing, and a mentor should be able to be empathetic. And I stress on that because, that human side is so critical. And if you don't start with that human inner soul, it's very difficult to be sharing. And you don't want to be that sage, because you want to really on the stage, you want to be the sage, of course, with that wisdom, but not on the stage. You want to be almost letting go of some of that, the information that you just hold up here, but you're sharing that information. And so empowerment, I mean, this is huge, because in mentorship, sometimes we think as the mentor that we totally hold the power. And so, yeah, to a certain stage, we do hold some power, but we want to share that. We want to let go of that. And so when I think about empowerment, it's about the process. It's about multidimensional. It's a social process. And so how are we building? How are we letting go? When you think of sage, sometimes I'm thinking about how do we surrender some of that and accept and give and empower, so that we're no longer on there holding everything within us. It's a freedom to choose, and a choice that we make to throw the ball out, let the ball come back to you, and throw it out again. And so it's situational. Every mentoring program, like I said, is different, but the actual contextual in your schools are going to look different as you begin to more or less let go and empower that person to then move forward. And so as leaders, part of my study work dealt with, how do we construct a meaning throughout our career and relating, those prior experiences and transforming new meanings about their role. And Mesro talks about this whole idea about critically reflecting. And that's key to the whole idea of transforming and understanding, what are some of those assumptions that we hold, those values, those beliefs, those feelings, those biases. And so how can we let go of some of that and change from what we were prior, coming in as leaders to where we want to get in transforming our own organization. And if you remember, I spoke a little bit about that little tiny plant that I started off. And so we're empowering leaders to go around the world and the globe. And so many of my teachers are now, whether they're IB coordinators in different parts of the world, whether they're running, the curriculum as leaders. And so this is what we want to do in our mentorship. We want to empower our leaders. So they too, we want to grow our own. We want to let them go and really transform areas. And so I say from our mentoring stage to our empowering stage to our transforming stage. And so paying mentorship forward, I think we can all do it. And if we stand and take a positionality in that idea of paying it forward, mentoring really is the gift that keeps on giving and changing our lives today and for the future.
Thank you so much, Suzette, to remind us of giving some sort of foundation to a concept, then what word do we call it, and how do we get that idea going in a way that actually can be transformational. I think we all struggle with, wanting to be both helpers and growers, etc. And then even just the choice of words that we use can make that difference. We have a couple of questions. One of them oh, here it is. We have about 5 or 6 minutes. Okay, so between the two of us, we'll try to make sure that we get a few of these questions answered. The first question has to do with strengths finders. So this viewer is saying that we like strengths finders as well. How do you go about using it systematically?
Right. So basically what I have done is really create a big chart and to determine those areas, and either grouping individuals to really look at their strengths, to really hone all those skills or those, whatever that learning that we need to develop. So I create this big chart and I plot everybody in, and so I know when the needs arise, and I simply go and ask for volunteers. I've noticed that your skills and your talents are in this area. How can you then, lead? Because we want to use those talents and skills to really develop their leadership. And so those talents really, they can be broad, but you can hone them into what your needs are at the time.
Yeah. For those of you who aren't unfamiliar with Strengths Finders, we'll add that to our resources, so you can have a way to go in and take a look at that and see whether that can be a helpful tool to you. We've got a couple of other related questions. Maybe this one: how can we balance the thin line between mentoring and coaching and outright holding people accountable? I'm adding the third part, which is outright just holding people accountable. This balance that we have between, helping people to grow, right, coaching them to be better, and even maybe holding ourselves accountable. Could you talk a little bit about how that works practically in your school?
In the context of schooling, I think those discussions doesn't happen, when something happens. Those kinds of discussions are happening way before. And it's based on your action plan. You start off with what your vision is and what is it we want to occur. And so you find ways of having those crucial conversations. Yeah, you want to be able to do that, but that feedback is so critical, whereby you're able to coach and mentor, but hold accountability. And when I was doing my whole training with this whole mentorship, there's a lot of paperwork involved. And that's where the accountability is, and the discussion and the discourse. And, you're going back and trying, and that trust is really critical, because you really sometimes hold, I know, and from my experience, I go to the mentee and I say, look, here's a situation. What do you think about this? What are your thoughts on this? And the mentee has ideas and can collaborate, and that's where that trust comes in, and the accountability and the coaching. There is that fine line, but you have to establish all that information ahead of time.
Yeah. We have a whole course dedicated to that in the PTC, is to try to figure out the difference between these words that float around, supervising, evaluating, appraising, coaching, mentoring. One of the very short learning activities that we have for our teacher leader group, and also we use in the PTC, is to flash 15 words on the screen and say, stand up if you think that's part of your job, head of department or grade level leader or principal. And everybody stands up when we put the word mentor up there. And I always say the same thing to them. I said, did you tell the mentee that you're the mentor? In other words, therein is sort of part of the relationship thing. And again, this is an area, the relationship and what that means, we can't talk about it, right, in generic terms. We really have to hone in and say, if there's a person called a leader, does that also come with mentor, supervisor, evaluator, appraiser, etc. All right. We have related, and we have you're going to have to talk fast, Suzette, here, okay? Because I have one more question for you that's related to your research. So this one says, how might you help mentees identify blind spots in a non-threatening way? That's the whole course, right? And turn feedback into areas of opportunity. So
Yeah.
in 30 seconds or less, how do you do that, Suzette?
It's really those blind spots are those conversations. It's all about conversations and how can you say in a very professional manner, you know, based on this, I have seen this. What are your thoughts? Can you tell me what you're feeling? And really getting them to unpack some of that information.
Okay, great. As I mentioned to you earlier when we were preparing, I think people knowing that you have done what you've done your doctoral work on, I think everybody on the call would be interested to at least, could you share a conclusion, something briefly
Right.
that came out of the research on, and the title was, or is, How Women of Color Leaders Make Sense of Their Professional and Personal Experiences in K-12 International Schools. I think you're the only person that's done this, so I think it's really vital that we hear at least 30 seconds worth of what.
Right. And so, yeah, you know, that whole idea stemmed from, you know, me wanting to know where are the leaders in terms of women and women of color in the international setting. And so really quickly, the themes that came out of my research was gender bias, being self-made for some women, the support, you know, what was that critical support, whether it's there, and generally it was looking at the boards who, to be successful, your boards have got to support you, you know, and that's the crux of you being successful, because if you have a board that's not, you know, someone who's actually mentoring you and taking you along, basically there's going to be those gaps in your even learning and development in a given school. Navigating the culture was another theme that came out based on the idea of this whole study I did, and family influence. How very often our families are the ones who begin to give us from very early in our lives mentorship. And all these lead to mentoring and networking and supporting. But those were maybe the 5 main themes that came out of the study.
Okay. Thank you for that. If there's something that we could read or that you could point us to where we could read some of those conclusions, I think that would be really a great contribution for us to know, you know, where can we go and read a little bit more about it.
So it's on
couldn't
ProQuest. And I know if you just put in my name, it will come up. And it's you know, it's at the university on ProQuest, but you can put it in and it should be able to come up. Even if you do Google Scholar, it should be able to come up through Google Scholar.
Okay. Thank you so much, Suzette. It's just great to, I wish we were in person.